Welcome to ISL Enabled Virtual Lab of CSIR.
Hi everyone,
I'm Utsuka.
I am Jigyasa and
And
you are listening to India Asks Why,
a science podcast supported by India Bioscience.
where we do the research for you to get smarter.
Join us as India becomes more curious,
One question at a
time. Have you ever looked up at the sky and wondered why some birds fly in groups? Well, Utsuka and Jigyasa have wondered about it too. Join them as they explore the reasons behind why some birds form groups. In the second segment, we have Dr. Vishweshaguttan from the Department of Ecological Sciences at Indian Institute of Science, who among various other cool ecological phenomena also studies why organisms form groups. Apart from asking questions about birds flying in groups, Utsuka and Jigyasa also get to hear from him about what it means to be a theoretical physicist and how he studies birds and other organisms in his lab. You all must have heard of the phrase, birds of a feather flock together. Ever wondered why this is so? Like, why do some birds fly in groups?
Flying together is such a complex task and might require some high level of coordination. I'm sure it has something to do with the bird's survival.
Survival? You mean that being in groups helps these birds live longer?
Oh, yes, Utsuka. Some birds fly together to get the maximum benefits of their numbers. They're a large team that flies together and survives together.
Oh, like the age old quote, united we stand, divided we fall.
Exactly. Several studies on a small bird called the European starling have shown that when a bird on one side of a group spots a predator, it makes slight movements in its position. This way, it is able to signal as many as 7 birds around itself to do the same, and so all the birds can move away from the threat. Sometimes this sudden coordinated flapping of the bird's wings can even startle the predator away from the group.
Oh, that's very smart of these birds. I'm also curious about what other ways in which large numbers help birds survive better.
So researchers have found that birds like the pink-footed geese and our common passenger pigeon fly together to look for food. Some birds even go ahead and make nests close to each other.
Oh, the way we like to build homes close to each other?
Precisely. So the way we like living close to each other so that we feel safe, birds do the same. Some birds even take a chance to sit on the same tree together. It's because something like the way we humans do in winters. We like to cuddle to stay warm. Sitting on the same tree actually helps the birds to stay warm in the same sense. They help maintain their body temperature.
That's very interesting. But I have one other question. What about that magnificent V formation that we see in the sky? Why do some birds fly like that?
Oh, Utsuka, have you seen the Air Force fighter jets during Independence parades?
Yes, I remember.
They also make the same V formation because it saves a lot of energy. So, when the birds need to fly really long distances, they make the V formation so that they are able to save the energy during such long flights. When the leader bird flaps its wings, it creates an updraft in the air, makes it easier for the birds behind it to fly. This is especially advantageous when a bird gets old or when it's sick or injured. This way, they can choose to stay at the back till the time they recover.
Oh, so you mean that the leader does all the work and the rest of the birds benefit? That's not fair for the leader.
No, Utsuka. That's not how it happens. The birds in the group take turns to lead it. So, when one leader gets tired, it switches position with another bird.
Oh, that's some bird team spirit right there. And we ought to learn the team spirit from these birds.
Definitely. So, flying together is always advantageous. Living in a community helps.
And now it's time to ask a scientist.
Continuing our exploration from the previous segment, we now have Dr. Vishuguthan, who is going to answer some of the questions that we didn't answer in the previous segment. Jignasa, why don't you go ahead and ask your questions?
So, Dr. Guttal, why do you think only some birds fly in groups?
So if the one way we think about this question, or in fact, probably important way we think about this question across all organisms, is to think of what are the costs of showing a group behavior, followed by what are the benefits of being in groups. Now, if the benefits outweigh the costs, then animals will live in groups. And the moment those become equal, they reach an equilibrium of the group size or the group property they are in. But the moment costs begin to dominate, then they again stop grouping.
So when I think of ecology, I think of field work, I think of going out there, counting the number of birds and so on. So how do you actually study these organisms, or why they sort of form communities and so on?
Right, whatever I just told you conceptually and verbally, we can sort of phrase them mathematically with some equations and some and with some functional forms, and we make some predictions as what could be an optimum group size, okay, or what could be an evolutionary equilibrium, if these kind of costs and benefits are at play. That's the computing part. One can say that could be the computing part of our expectations. On the other hand, if you are an experimental person, or if you want to test your theory, you also go and think of measurable quantities that could give you some handle on, what are these benefits, what are these costs, how can I really go and measure them in the field. Okay, and that's a different challenge, entirely altogether. So here we measure what are the benefits and costs in an experimental setup, whereas in theory we sort of formulate them, we sort of mathematically calculate or sometimes computationally calculate, or like, so those are the two approaches, sort of, then they go together. They cannot, in my opinion, sort of that can be done entirely independent of one another to make sense of the natural world. And those kind of formalisms tell us why, in some cases, animals form groups, whereas in some other cases, animals will not form.
So is it just ecological context, or is it more about the kinds of birds, let's say, that we're talking about? If being small or being big make any difference?
I mean, it can make a difference. That also is part of the ecology, right? What are their body constraints? What are their physiological constraints? So they all play a role. And in fact, even within a species, if you look at their life history, there are changes in the way animal groups. Now, think of, for example, there are many fish species. When they are juveniles, you find them in large groups. I know they can form really large groups, primarily because they're tiny. They're highly prone to predation by larger organisms. On the other hand, as they become big, right, now the chances of predation reduces, and the mating is the main sort of main factor contributing to their future fitness now, right? So therefore, even if it means a potential risk of predation, it's now better to focus on the mating part. So they often are not as grouping. They might be maybe in a smaller group, and they may not be even in smaller groups. They're often in pairs. Okay, when it comes to mating. So across, just even for a species, across their life stages, their grouping behavior changes. So what we usually do is, it depends on the question. Do we want to understand a given species, how it's evolving over, across the life history, or do we want to understand, given a life history stage, why is it doing what it is doing? So yeah, so depending on the context, we study, using appropriate tools.
Mm-hmm. That's nice. So, did you like in the have an interest in studying these animals from the very beginning?
Like a lot of people, I also like nature. There is, but my training was in physics. Again, for me, for a large part of my life, biology meant where lot of memorization and mostly cell biology. Therefore, I always stayed away from it. So, what really excited me was the fact that the things that I can actually observe, literally by eyes, you don't need a microscope to observe birds flying, on your terrace, or even could be an insect swarm on the wall of your, garden, right? Or it could be ant trails that we see everywhere, right? So you don't need a microscope or an extraordinary instrument. So what I realized was that they can be really understood by what we call sophisticated mathematics and physics. To me, that was extremely appealing.
Okay. Talking about your lab life, what is something that excites you the most? What keeps you going?
Tough question. I guess, I mean, there is a sense of, elegance in studying nature and thinking about answering these questions. That is one driver. It's not just doing research, not nothing else. It's not really that. It's the combination of research as well as the fact that allows opportunity to interact and think about those questions, talk to people, and teaching is also plays a really really engaging role.
That's nice. So, we want to know what is that one myth that you would like to give our listeners about, doing science and, about a career in science, probably.
Okay, I think thinking about how science functions is also as important, perhaps even more important than learning various aspect specific facts. I think just knowing facts, ants produce pheromone. I think that's really boring to just know that. But how did people discover ants produce pheromones? How did people discover what do ants do with pheromones? We need to think more on those lines. I think is also really, really important. Now, for those who are interested in scientific careers, if you are truly passionate about science and if you think that you also want a career in science, go for it. And don't hesitate.
Do you now understand why birds fly in groups?
Yes. So it depends on a lot of factors, it turns out, like bird size, risks, benefits, and uses. Some birds fly together to protect themselves from predators, whereas others do so to make long distance flights easier. Theoretical ecologists, like Dr. Guttal himself, write mathematical equations which represents these factors and use computers to find reasons behind why some species group.
And Dr. Guttal recommends going beyond the simple facts in science and thinking about how they were discovered.
But listeners, what we know about these birds might change as we get more evidence over time.
Who knows? One of our listeners in the future might study these birds and find something about them that we never knew before. So stay curious and ask questions. So that's it for today.
If you want to know more about today's scientist, check out their profile. The link is in the show notes.
Or if you have any questions that you would want Utsuka and Jigyasa to explore, shoot them away to indiaaskswhy@gmail.com.
Or if you would like to directly talk to us, join the fun on our Telegram group. Again, the link for it is in the show notes.
And for more updates about India Asks Why, follow India Bioscience on all of their social media handles. So it's India Bioscience on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
Shweta N. Hegde and Ruchi Manglunia are the hosts for the podcast.
And Ada Zibu helped us transcribing and designing the interview segment. And we would also like to thank Dr. Vishwaguttal for letting us interview him. India Asks Why is sponsored by India Bioscience's second outreach grant, and we are also grateful to India Bioscience for hosting us.
So stay tuned and stay curious.